Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 235 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, Neelan, and with me, as always, are my fellow co-hosts, Mark and Kellen. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing all right. I was hoping that the Ambi thing would stick and you'd be gone forever, but he's back.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint everyone. He preferred Ambi to me.
Also, I can confirm that I am fallow, as in not pregnant.
That was a big thing that happened last week, Neil, and you don't want to...
Yeah. I did listen back to the episode and was distressed to discover that you were unaware of the principles of pregnancy, Kellen, so I'm glad to know.
I talked to him after the show, though, and now he has confirmed that he is fallow, as he said.
Perfect.
No,
Good
guys, don't put this in the episode, Mark, like you want to do. Say your first sentence again. You said the word fallow when you meant like fellow. Fellow co-host. You said fallow with a very clear fallow, and then I'm like, well, I'm not a field, and I'm not pregnant either, so... And it's related to last week.
I'm like just in shock that you're the one correcting me in pronunciation for once. But...
No, Neelan. Don't even think about this.
This week on the show, we're going to be talking about a phenomenon that we've seen across board games, something that's familiar to people that are fans of film. You remember how when Finding Nemo came out, shortly thereafter, Will Smith shows up with a shark tail?
I do. Who could forget?
And then right around the same time, Ants and A Bug's Life come out together. This is not a coincidence. This is a phenomenon Hollywood calls twin films.
Ants was better.
No.
Well...
Let's be clear, all of the Pixar versions...
Stop derailing your own intro, Neelan.
We're going to explore the same phenomenon in board games where we have two pairs of games that somehow get twinned together in the public consciousness that form sort of a grudge match between the two. We'll be coming back to that later in the episode. Before we get there, we're going to be talking about the games that we've been playing. And this week on the show, we have Viking See-Saw and Dandelions, a little double feature by Kellen, followed by Codex Naturalis and Luna. So let's kick it off with Kellen. Tell me about See-Saw.
So first of all, speaking of twin films, you know how you have like people who are like your blood brothers and then people who are sort of like your antagonists? One might say that one, Mr. Mike DeLisio, who is a professional, he's paid to do this on the Dice Tower, would be good at recommending games to people. Right? That would be what one would expect from a professional who is in fact paid to have this sort of thing. I had a chance to play the E10 Reiner Knizia game, believe it or not, Viking See-Saw, which is literally a dexterity game where a ship is a seesaw, a purple ship is a seesaw. And this is brought to you by E10, which is the publisher of Crash Octopus, Tokyo Highway, and some other silly dexterity games. And this game is quite literally, you have a ton of different types of and then you are loading them on one side of the ship, seesaw, which is on the upside. And if it flips to the downside, you have to take penalty. So you're trying to put just enough to make it stay up and then pass it to the other person, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's the whole game. You know, and then whoever gets rid of all their stuff first and or the game ends. This is barely a board game. This is in a silly box. This is fine. It's totally fine. Mike DeLisio had me import this from Japan. And so if nothing else, just be careful of who you trust. And remember, some of these are paid professionals. That would be Mike DeLisio. A paid professional recommended that I import Viking See-Saw. This is a series of games. They actually have like a weird box shape, which is sort of like an Oink game box, except taller. And there's a couple other ones that are like, there's a match game. Anyway, I don't know how Reiner Knizia was involved in this, but he was. His name is on it, the only true and living doctor. Enough said about Viking See-Saw. Neelan, you loved it, though. It's your favorite new Reiner game.
Yeah, I mean, it's my favorite dexterity game, my favorite Reiner game, my favorite Viking game, which is impressive.
Saying a lot.
Yeah. No, look, I think all dexterity games ultimately kind of just feel like trifles, and it's almost just like a rundown to like how long the gimmick lasts. I think Viking See-Saw gets there after one game, which is,
yes,
not the highest praise. But I had fun with it because I think the thing that's smart about it is that each of the bits has different densities, right? So some of them are metal, some of them are wood. So there's like this double feature fun of like, where are you going to place it on the thing? How high up and how heavy is it going to be? There's some fun in like figuring out exactly what to place at the right time strategically.
You have spheres and cubes, and you have hairbands to store the spheres because otherwise they just roll off the table. So that also comes in there if you're looking for hairbands. Similar to Sac Noir if you want beans, another dexterity game. But moving on to the main attraction, Dandelions, the latest from BoardGameTables.com, the best named publisher of all time, considering they sell you both the board games and the table with which you play them on. If you ever find yourself in need of a table after buying a board game, you should look at BoardGameTables.com. That is a board game publisher. That is not the name of their website. No, wait, it is also their website. Dandelions.
And if you buy both, they'll even sell you a .com domain. It's like this.
Yeah, you can get it all. Dandelions is the latest in their small box release set, and stay tuned for the end of this where we will hot take the rankings of Dandelions, Ghost of Christmas, GPS, Sequoia, and Mountain Goats, the 5 of them. In Dandelions, it is a 2 or 3 player game that is essentially a roll and move, sort of. Everyone has 11 dice. 11 beautiful dice. The problem is the orange player's dice are the most beautiful, and I had to give those to Neelan, even though I wanted them when we played Dandelions. In the game, you roll all of your 11 dice, and you are choosing one of them and moving around a board that is essentially roll and move, right? You see all your 11. You're going to be planning out in advance which ones you might go first. Where you land, because there are 5 different sections of the board that you can land on, you store that die. It becomes planted. And then at the end of the game, wherever that die is going to score you points based on each location is 1, 2, 3, 5, or 8 points. So if you had 3 dice on the 1, that would be terrible because you'd only score 3 points. 3 dice on the 8, that would be amazing because you'd score 24 points. In addition to that, there is a area majority scoring, which is on each of the 5 locations. Whoever has the most die or dice, which I never remember, who cares? You also get the pip value. So in the aforementioned example, if I had 3 dice on the 1, even though I only scored 3 points for that first type of scoring, for the other type of scoring, if those were all 6s, I would score 18 points. That is essentially the whole game. If you plant, which is to place a dice on a square where there is an opponent's, also that same pip value dice, you can move them adjacently, which allows you to like devalue their points or change a little bit of the area majority. The thing that is weird is that you have 11 dice, and similar to a trick taker, your biggest, widest, broadest decision is the first turn, and by the time you get to like the last 3 or 4 turns, it's almost like, oh, I've only got 2 potential options. This game is quick, lightning fast, had a good time. Neelan, what do you think of Dandelions? Oh, wait. Before we go there is an important thematic thing, Mark,
right,
that I forgot to read. This is important when you are playing Dandelions. Mark, are you paying attention?
I'm paying full attention.
Players gather all the dice in their hand, right? What is the name of this game, Mark? First of all.
Dandelions.
Perfect. You're in line. They roll them. Players gather all their dice in their hand. Okay, check.
Got it. I'm imagining it. Yeah.
Yep. Then they roll them in unison. Okay.
Got it.
Imagining, Mark, can you imagine with me what it would be like to be the seeds of a dandelion? Okay. Carried away by the wind. Okay, so there's multiple layers, right? All the dice, right? So the components of this, unison, right? Imagining seeds of a dandelion, 3, step 4, and 4, the wind, right?
The wind, yeah.
Neelan, this is where yesterday you did the sound effect for me. Today, not hearing it. That's the wind. Take them all up, roll them all together. Dandelions. Neelan, what did you think? Sorry, that was important. Important editorial clarity.
Sure, but before you move on, I just want to let you know, I don't know if you know this already, you probably do, that this was originally, this was a reimplementation of a game called Birth, which was Birth, and the line here about Birth is a completely new strategy dice game on the theme of the universe creation.
Okay.
So it really has stepped down from the universe creation to dandelions being grown.
Somewhat less grand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked this. The high points, right, are where you have the right move that gets your die onto the section that allows you to move your opponent's dice to a place both where they score less points and are suddenly surrounded by more of your dice. So there's this double whammy thing that happened that I used to great effect, if I don't mind saying, to win our game of Dandelions.
That's irrelevant. Strike that from the record.
There is one little quirk that Callum didn't mention, which I thought was neat, which is there is one spot on the board exactly where if your piece moves to there, you get to re-roll your pool of dice. So there is a little bit of, like, as you're approaching that point, like, am I happy with the set of dice I have as I'm about to begin my next go-around, or do I want to just re-roll them and see if I'm going to get something that feels a little bit more useful? So there is an element of kind of almost like a push your luck, because you want high pip values when you're trying to score them if you're in the majorities on places, but you also kind of sometimes just want small values just to finesse your movements. Like some of these tiles you can move through only have like 1 or 2 spaces on them, so you're very apt to like shoot past them if you don't have low enough dice values. So yeah, there's like some fun interplay there. I thought this was neat. It's cute. It took 5 to 10 minutes to play. It was dead simple and it was great.
Yep, I am eager to try this at 3 players. I think that I will be taking this on my upcoming family vacation. I'm excited to see that group play it, but it is a trifle. It is a 10-minute thing versus even a 20-minute thing, and it does feel like just like that, like a little bit like a parlor game with some gamery elements. All right, we've arrived at the ranking of every game that Board Game Tables has published in this box. This is important. Here we go. Where should we start? We should start at the top, right?
How many games are there?
There are 5.
Five.
I have the sheet here. This is my note sheet, right? I've played them all. We'll start at the top. Mountain Goats, number 1, right? Okay, now I'm trying to remember desperately. Help me. What is this, greater than or lesser than? Like, which way is the symbol if we're starting at the top and going down? It's the
crocodile
Yeah.
wants to eat the bigger number.
No. I know that.
Okay.
That's the better one.
Yeah.
Because he's happy crocodile.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's called a greater than or a less than symbol.
It depends on which way it's.
Oh my God!
It's the
Oh
same
my
symbol.
God! So we got mountain goats. Okay, we got the crocodile eating mountain goats.
Okay.
So in that sentence, right? Mountain goats, number 1.
Yep.
Now, do I say I don't say crocodile. I say I say greater than. No, I say less than.
No, you say greater than. Mountain goats is greater than.
Oh, as a sentence. Oh, okay. Well, it's important because there's an amount of these, right? This is popular internet parlance, and I may be aging out of it. I'm not, because you two are both older than me. But mountain goats, greater than. Dandelions, greater than. Ghosts of Christmas, greater than. Sequoia, greater than. GPS. You're welcome, BoardGameTables.com. Thank you so much for not supporting the show. All right, please cut off my mic and move on to the next person.
So, Kellen and I also played a game of Codex Naturalis. This is a game that I've seen a lot of popularity on Board Game Arena. It is designed by Thomas Dupont. This is a very simple card laying game. You have a hand of 3 cards, and on your turn you're going to play one of those cards and then draw a card to replace back to a hand of 3. Now, on these cards, what you have are usually symbols in some of the corners, and you can imagine these symbols as kind of this ongoing accumulation of, let's call them resources you have. So let's say that you have a card that has 2 mushrooms in the top left and the top right corner. Once you add that card to your tableau, you now have 2 mushrooms that you could potentially use to spend on future cards. But whenever you play a card, you're covering up those corners. If you can imagine, these cards are just fitting together corner to corner, making up this sort of array where by placing a card, you are potentially covering up symbols. Now, if you have a card that costs 2 mushrooms, you can still spend the mushroom right before you cover it, but once you've covered it, you've lost that mushroom effectively. By playing that card, you're accumulating more symbols, which will allow you to play more and more expensive cards, until eventually you're playing cards that have point values on them. So this is not unlike Splendor in that regard, in where you have this accumulation of small-scale resources which will allow you to build towards the bigger and better cards, which are eventually accumulating you points. Like Splendor, once you hit a point cap, in this game 20 points, the game will end. There is some end-of-game scoring, and whoever has the most points wins. The end of the game scoring typically amounts to these objective cards that are shared objectives that every player can work towards, which are just going to be things like, hey, have some feather symbols. If for every 2 feather symbols in your array, get 3 points. Or having cards of specific colors and specific arrangements, which will also get you points. In addition, you have one secret objective that you get at the start of the game. So once you revealed that, tallied up of your points, whoever has the most wins. That is really the gist of the game, but the slight twist to this is that not every corner of every card is always available for placement. So you can definitely build yourself into corners where if you're trying to set up, say, a specific pattern of, in my case, I had tried to set up a diagonal of 3 purple cards, you can place a card such that you actually force yourself into a situation where you're unable to play that last card you crucially played. So there's a little bit of spatial puzzling around how you're positioning these cards so that you can optimize the placement while also trying to avoid covering symbols you need. But that's largely the game front to back. It's dead simple, and I thought it was really, really clever for how simple it is. Also, and I can't stress enough, the production on this game is lovely. There are these small glossy cards, some of which have gold inlay on them, and they're all bright, vibrant, and colorful, and once you have your sort of grid of cards all laid out, it just looks super vibrant and super neat. I like this a lot. I think it was very, very cool. Kellen, what do you think of Codex Naturalis?
I think that Neelan, even with the very nice description of how beautiful this is underselling how cool this gold embossed inlay thing is. And call me a magpie or what have you. I was loving it. Okay? I saw shiny cards. I wanted shiny cards. I took shiny cards. Very happy with that. It is interesting to me how, in some ways, there was a little bit of innovation-esque symbol counting. It's like, I've got 3 mushrooms, he's got 4, so that card is going to be easier for him to take and use. I am not one for spatial puzzles in general. I think Christina could really like this one. I think that it's small enough, simple enough, that I was very, very charmed. I was charmed. I was charmed also because I beat you, and it wasn't particularly close, if I do say so myself. I rushed the end game. He hadn't seen that strategy before, given there were sort of layers to it, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think the Splendor card array is right? Which is like, if it was LOL top decking, it would be too luck dependent. But you are trying to sort of make a pretty little thing a very good success. And one I'd like to try on BGA just to see what happens when you remove the shiny things that a magpie doth love.
A lot of Splendor references here. Are we talking about a potential Splendor killer?
Mark, I knew as soon as the sentence started.
Yeah, that is Codex Naturalis by Thomas Dupont. Mark, tell us about Luna.
Yeah, I got a chance to scratch an unplayed Feld off my list as I got Luna to the table this week for the full title, as I'm sure Kellen wants to know. It is Luna in the Domain of the Moon Priestess.
There's no colon on
there. There is no colon. There's a dash, which is, I know, lesser than a colon. But if we're talking about crocodiles, I think the crocodile would eat the colon and leave the dash behind. Anyway, Luna is...
Are you making fun of me?
No, we're talking crocodiles. I was trying to add to the conversation, trying to enhance the conversation with the crocodiles.
Does that make you feel big?
Like a big man.
Greater than.
Are you a big man now? Luna is a Stefan Feld game from 2010 that was published by Z-Man and Hall Games before most recently being reprinted by TMG in 2013, I think just before they folded, but I don't know. Luna is a weird game. I think that's the first thing I want to say about it. The most obvious way in which it is weird is its theme. You play as an order of monks who are trying to impress the aforementioned Luna, the Moon Priestess, in order to succeed her when she retires, I guess. I'm not really sure. The art is also a little weird. It's Clemens Franz, but he's off the farm, and now he's doing this, what's I guess supposed to be spooky, dark fantasy theme, and it just didn't really super work for me. It's a little cartoony of a box cover, given what I think is supposed to be like dark, but whatever.
Could it be that Clemens Franz art is just bad? Could that be the reason?
You don't like Clemens Franz Agricola art? It doesn't feel like that feels so cozy to me. Yeah.
I think maybe actually Agricola might be the only time where I'm like okay with it.
I generally like it. It triggers a nostalgia feeling to me that I enjoy, but I don't know.
Back to jail with you, Neelan. Do you get the reference?
No.
I do not either.
As the kids say, when you get out of jail, right?
Yeah.
They say you're off the farm. But you idiots wouldn't know that, which is a sentence that Mark just said a sentence ago. Come on, you guys. Do you not even understand comedy?
We haven't spent enough time in jail, clearly. Anyway, the art aside, it's fine because the graphic design, I think, works in terms of like the readability and stuff. So if you can get over the box cover, then you're probably okay. Luna is also weird to describe. It's mostly a worker placement game, but like many of Feld's other games, there's a lot of stuff going on all at once. At its core, though, you've got these 7 islands that circle the main board that are worker placement spots. You'll start the game by placing workers on a few of the islands, and then you'll spend your turns activating the workers, usually 2 at a time, by taking them from the island itself to the sea adjacent to the island where they're now spent and generally unable to be used for the rest of the round. So you're sort of deactivating them by taking them from the island and throwing them into the sea adjacent to the island. You'll be activating those workers for a number of reasons, but primarily it's going to be to get more workers, to build buildings if you're on the same spot as the builder, which is a standee that rotates around the islands from round to round, and also to get favor tokens, which are associated with their particular island. So there's one favor token that's associated with one island that gives you a virtual worker. There's others that do different things. So you'll do that, or you'll be sending your workers onto the main board, which is how you do most of your scoring. The favor tiles I just spoke about are sort of like powers, each associated with one of the islands. You generally spend 2 of your workers to get one of these tiles that grants you a power. These are a big part of the game and let you break the rules, which you'll be doing with these tiles all the time. You're also limited to 1 of each type of tile at any given point, which forces you to plan ahead when there's something you want to do, but it's something you need the same tile twice. So there's situations where you have this thing that you want to do in your mind, and it requires you to get the favorite token twice. And because you can't have more than 1 token, you have to figure out, okay, am I going to do half of this in this round and then half of this in the next round? Or am I going to have to try to figure a way to get the token twice in the same round, which is sort of action intensive. That being said, there's always enough of these favorite tiles for each player so that in a sort of Euro-y, Feldian way, you can't get totally blocked out of what you want to do. Though that being said, also, it's not really an overly multiplayer solitaire game. So even though you can't get blocked from getting these tiles, it's not a totally heads down, do your own thing game. You're doing all this in service of getting points from a number of different ways. It's typical in a Feld game. But a way you'll typically get a lot of points is by sending your workers to the central board, which is surrounded again by these worker placement islands. This is done in a 2-step process. First, you need to spend 2 workers to send one of them to the outside of the board, and then take another action later to send them inside into the central area to actually score with them. There's a little bit of an area control thing going on here. Not too much, but you can potentially knock out other players from that central area, which scores you an immediate point for knocking them out, and potentially passive points per round as you get to score 1 point per worker that you have surviving in this like central area at the end of every round. You're also depriving your opponent, obviously, of scoring those passive points as you knock them out. My favorite mechanism of Luna, however, is the way that the round end is implemented. For your turn, you can choose to flip one of these candle timer tiles, and that's your whole turn. You're still in the round, and so when it comes back around to you, you can take an action. But once the 4th one of these candle tiles has been flipped, the round ends. So it's a way of passing, potentially seeing what your opponents are doing, but also pushing the end of the round, which is sort of a fun way to add tension to the play. It's like, wait, why did Kellen flip the timer so early in the round? Why did he sacrifice a full action to flip this? Is he trying to rush it? Am I going to be able to get all my stuff done in time? Should I change gears because I'm not going to get as many actions as I thought I was going to be? So Luna is weird. It's probably the weirdest Feld that I've played. Maybe In the Name of the Rose is weirder, but I think it's close. I think if it reminds me of any game of his, it's probably Bonfire. One for the dark theme, which like Luna also feels pasted on, but also because it felt a little mechanical to me. There are 14 things you can do on your turn, and while it's not as bad as that sounds, like 14 possible actions, there is a lot of processing, at least in the first couple of games that I've played, about what you should do on your turn. One of the reasons that I decided to play this now is that it promised to be 25 minutes a player. So I was hoping that we'd get this done in an hour, hour and a half, and it ended up taking 2.5 hours with 3 players, which isn't ridiculous for a medium-heavy game, but I think it's sort of a sign that this game is probably susceptible to dragging, especially with players that are AP prone. So I think Luna is fine. If you're a Feld completionist, I don't think this is going to bum you out or something you're going to want to avoid playing. But otherwise, I think it's worth a play or two and probably not much more. Though, who knows? I mean, the weirdness of the game might feel novel enough that you'll love it and have it shoot to one of your favorite games. But as it stands, I'm glad I played Luna, but like Bonfire, I'm not sure if I'm going to seek out many more plays. And yeah, that is Luna by Stefan Feld, most recently published by the dearly departed TMG.
This is one of those weird ones where, despite you sort of having attempted to talk me out of it, I'm kind of weirdly intrigued to try it. Just because weird Feld is exactly the 2 words I needed to hear to get me excited about the game.
Yeah, I mean, there are point salad elements to it, and there are a lot of like interlocking things that I think you get from a lot of Feld games, but the way the worker placement is done is sort of strange. The way that workers are deactivated potentially can be reactivated, and there's like a geographical aspect to it where like if you want to have a worker do something else, do one of the actions on another island, it takes a specific type of action that is sort of interesting. So yeah, it's definitely strange, but I think that strangeness can be a minus because it just lends itself to this mechanical feeling. Because you have to like reason out all the different things you can do, and because the theme doesn't do it any favors by making it like very clear what your goal is, it just makes it feel a little mechanical. That uniqueness sort of goes from being unique and novel to a little like, oh wait, I have to think about what I'm going to do on every turn a little bit.
I do have a rebuttal, which I don't know if you're aware of, but there are pictures of people cosplaying as the Moon Priestess herself, Luna, on BGG.
Right. No, that's a good point. That
you hadn't considered that.
I hadn't considered that level of Luna-ing. I think if I played this with a person in full cosplay as Luna, there are also other characters. You can be Luna, you can be the Builder, you can be the Apostate. So there are different characters. Yeah, the Guard. So for a 4-player game, one person can dress up as each of those, and I think that would, in fact, aid the joy.
Elevate.
Yeah,
at least
elevate.
1 point above. But really, have you ever seen anyone board game cosplay before? I think you're significantly undervaluing my contribution to the discussion.
I don't think I have. I'm trying to think of all the times we've gone to conventions. I don't think I've seen a single board game cosplayer. I've certainly seen a cosplay at Gen Con, but I don't think I've ever seen a board game related cosplay. Have you?
Well, my point would be unproven if I did, so I can't say. But not on BGG's image gallery.
Something that is coming up in the near future that we're super excited for is Gen Con. This is about 2 weeks away by the time this episode goes out, and we are planning on being there. So if you too are going to be at Gen Con, we would love to hang out with you. We'll be posting more details in our Discord about a potential meetup, but otherwise, if you see one of us, if you want to play a game with one of us, just let us know and we'd be happy to. That is the Board Game Barrage promise.
This is, if you see something, say something.
Yes.
As opposed to another thing you could do, which is don't ask, don't tell. We prefer see something, say something.
Exactly. The better of those 2 policies.
Yes.
As usual, people who will be in attendance as well as ourselves will be using the conventions and meetup channel in our Discord. So you can head over there if you want to arrange something with other people who will be in Gen Con, including us. That is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Let's get into our feature topic this week, which are board game grudge matches, little twinned matchups that seem to spring up in the community where someone says, well, this new game looks like a better version of X, or Azul, that's just basically Sagrada, but with mosaic chunky tile things. This topic was inspired by a thread that we saw on the board game subreddit by Casey Moto. So thank you so much for inspiring this week's episode. I think the way we should do this is we're going to come up with some of these grudge matches to work through. Some good examples where we found that board games have sort of either come to prominence and have been often compared to another established board game, or 2 board games have come around at the same time. Let's get some of those onto the table, and then later in the episode, we'll work through them and just find the best of each of those pairings. That will make sense?
Sounds good. Like the way that Babe killed Gordy. back in 1995, which is what came to mind when Kellen proposed this topic. My twin movies were Gordy and Babe. Anybody remember Gordy out there?
No one remembers Gordy
Big
because
Gordy
Babe
fans?
killed it.
Why do you keep bringing this up?
I'm trying to
seems
bring
like
back
you have
Gordy.
This weird fascination. I'm just
Nobody talks about Gordy anymore. He was a talking pig. Everybody's all in Babe now.
illusionist and prestige.
That was actually one of the first times I was like made aware of this as a weird thing, because like I felt like it's happened all the time in like animation, but this happening on the scale of like a large live action production just felt especially weird to me.
Gordy was live action, but it had a talking pig in it.
What about 1995 Showgirls versus 1996 Striptease?
That's the first one that came to mind when we thought about this topic.
I've never seen those films.
Yeah.
The one is NC-17. No, I've never seen those films.
Sure.
All right, this is about board games, Mark.
Let's keep it about board games. What are some of these matchups that come to mind, everybody?
So for me, the first one that immediately came to mind, and again, there's thematic, then there's mechanic, and they both kind of intertwine, and then there's times when they come out. I feel like the one I remember perhaps the most, well, actually not the most, but we'll get to Splendor. Azul and Sagrada was the immediate first one that came to mind because they're both abstract-ish multiplayer affairs, but they're also both like really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then I think the 1-2 punch of how this became a grudge match is then Azul was like, oh, you, Sagrada. We also care about stained glass windows. Came out with Azul Sintra, which was about stained glass windows. And so now we have a grudge match between Azul and Sagrada. I do feel like what's interesting is that what feels like a lopsided fight, right now, because we all know the answer in the grudge match of Azul versus Sagrada, was not always as lopsided. It used to be that this was a fair fight. We just now know because the fight happened many, many years ago.
Right. And similarly, I mean, the one that you alluded to, which I think is probably the one that is the most prominent, is the Century Spice Road versus Splendor showdown.
There it is.
Like, I remember when the Spice Road and Gollum Edition were kicking around for the first time, and everyone was saying, this is better than Splendor, this is better than Splendor, this is the Splendor killer. In my memory, that's where that comes from. And
absolutely.
We all know how that shook out. Splendor can't be killed. It will live forever. And
that's true, except for the gold embossing.
I think those who have looked for a Splendor killer, I think that the only game that they currently still claim is a Splendor killer is Century Spice Road. I think there are still some holdouts that think that Century is better than Splendor.
Well, we haven't gotten to the second phase of this two-phase conversation.
That's true.
You idiots.
I'm just so excited about two-phase things that I jumped ahead. Another one that springs to mind, one half of the pairing is my recently announced second favorite game of all time, Race for the Galaxy. And on the other side, there is the other game designed by the same designer, Thomas Lehman, Roll for the Galaxy. So sort of two games that are twinned in many ways, not only based on theme and the way they play, not so much release because Roll was released much later than Race, but two games that are very, very similar. In fact, you might even add a third, which is New Frontiers, which is the third in the For the Galaxy series of games.
Okay, Mark. It seems like Race for the Galaxy is in a fight with everyone because you could also play the versus Puerto Rico or versus San Juan game, and all of those would be grudge matches.
Race takes on all comers.
It's a good fighter, is what you're saying.
That's right.
I don't know. New Frontiers.
New Frontiers is good.
Yeah. And it is interesting to me how some of this it's not as literal, because in the case of Race and Roll, those are literally the same designer.
Right.
And they're 4-letter R words. And yet somehow, they're in a grudge match versus, Ants versus A Bug's Life, which is more life or death for all those involved.
Sure.
So interesting to think about.
There is a recent example that came to mind in the prep for this episode, which was about a year or two ago when the worker placement / deck building hybrids were rolling around. It kind of seemed like Dune Imperium and Lost Ruins of Arnak both shot into the sea at exactly the same time, and everyone was trying to pitch them against each other, which is the game that blends these two mechanics together the best. I think that's one that is definitely worthy of this conversation, not only because of just how recent it is, but because it did really seem like, hey, we had these two mechanics that were rolling around for a long time, and then all of a sudden two really, really, really big games combine them effectively around the same time.
And this also feels like the closest thing to like the twin films concept, which is sort of like they sort of come out like deck building has come, the first generation of Dominions, then the Ascension likes, with a different type of card row. And then we get here, which is like this deck building plus thing, right? And it's almost like in the collective consciousness of people that are designing games, they're not trying to copy each other, right? But it is like this. Similarly, we could say Clank versus Quest for El Dorado. And I don't know that one is explicitly as called out as much, but it is sort of this deck building / going on an adventure type thing that was like designed around the same time of each other.
On the other hand, as opposed to the mechanics being the thing that twins games together, there is the more theme and weight situation. And a good example of this, I think, are games that both won the Spiel. One very, very recently, this is Cascadia versus Wingspan. So these are both games where you've got a similar theme, you've got a very welcoming animal theme, and you've got a similarity in weight. These are both sort of like medium weight games that are designed, I think, to appeal to a larger audience. And were very successful, at least critically, if not commercially, in terms of appeal and the accolades they received. Again, both winning Spiels.
I know Beth Sobel hasn't done all of the art for both of these, but she does do art for Wingspan.
That's correct.
And Cascadia. But I also feel like there are so many nature games coming out right now that we may not even be able to accurately know what the grudge match is, because you've got Calico, you've got like parks and trails and Verdant, among other things.
I think you could twin these two, specifically Wingspan and Cascadia, just because of how successful they've been commercially and critically. Like, they're both Spiel winners. I think it's a natural way to pair them up. But you're right. I think Wingspan sort of opened the door to this, hey, nature theme being a very...
People will buy this.
Yeah, that's right. Very highly copied aspect of game design.
I think an older one that has died out a little bit in the modern ethos was Eclipse versus Twilight Imperium. You saw this a lot more in the first edition days of Eclipse, I think, versus now where we're in the second edition of Eclipse and the fourth edition of Twilight Imperium. Obviously, 4 is better than 2, but in this case, it was the Twilight Imperium, the negotiation, the sort of little Ameritrashy mechanisms versus the sort of Euro Eclipse. And I think that this one also set apart people who were like, I like my Euro games, and then the other people were going, no, I like my fighty negotiation games. And so there's a little bit of a thematic connection, but a very clear divide in people who enjoy types of board games, and one appeals to, the people who want a shorter game with more Eurofied mechanisms. And again, I have not played Eclipse, but it did strike me as one of the big ones where you could sort of know a person by whether they preferred Twilight Imperium or Eclipse.
The other one that I wanted to call out is one that I think has been a recurring headache for me come the top 50, which is how I feel about Codenames versus Decrypto.
Yeah.
That's one where I struggle to shake out the two in my head and which one deserves the accolade. So we'll come back to that later in the episode.
And I think that probably the newest game that has come out that has incited some of this argument between it and a progenitor is Ark Nova, which a lot of people, I think, rightly have compared to Terraforming Mars. Both of them, these big stacks of cards and tableau building. So I think that's a very clear pairing as well.
Well, I think that's plenty. So let's...
Well, there's more, Neelan. And if you have more, please give them to us in board games so we can all argue about them, because that's the point of living.
Absolutely. But yeah, let's work through these matches, and we're going to decide definitive winners for each of them. Let's start with Azul and Sagrada.
Yeah, this one's been settled. I remember, actually, let me just say, I think on episode 1 of this very podcast, I declared Azul better than Sagrada. I think that was one of the very first things I said on this podcast. So,
you declared it?
I declared it. I declared that there was something similar between the two, and I said Azul is clearly a better game. Play the tape back.
I'm not going to do that. How about this, though? You can play Sagrada on Nintendo Switch. What do you think about that?
Had not considered that.
You hadn't thought about the Switch factor.
Not
this is just, I feel like it's a solved state. It's like everyone loves Azul. It's like the grudge matches happen in time, and then, history proves the victor.
Yeah, I will say that one of the things that makes this slightly hard for me is I've only played Sagrada digitally, but yeah, mechanically...
On Nintendo Switch?
and not a Nintendo Switch, on my phone. But yeah, mechanically, I prefer almost everything about Azul. I think the way that it's interactive is so compelling, and I do think that it does more with even its components and its tactility and its visual stylings.
Yeah, I think both games are supposed to be like abstracts where you are interacting with opponents, but Azul is just so much clearer in terms of where you are, what your board state is, what your opponent's board state is. Sagrada, I remember just that very first game of it, and subsequent games prove this out, where you have to look over and say, okay, what is that value of that die? What is the value of what color of that die? And it's just much harder to parse what your opponent is doing and what you need to do to block them.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the asterisk being that neither of you have played this on Nintendo Switch.
That's going to change my opinion entirely.
We're aligned. This is a boring grudge match. We're aligned.
Next up is going to be Century Spice Road or Century Golem Edition versus Splendor.
I just can't even with this one. Century Spice Road is inane. It is a resource conversion. Like, literally, Neelan and I still remember distinctly how hyped we were to get this. How we both got our Golem editions, our Golem, you know, we get the crystals out, we play it once, and we're like, yeah, let's play it again. And I think it was like midway through the second game, we looked at each other and had a moment, Neelan. Not our first moment, but a moment. Where we're like, this isn't any good at all.
Yeah.
You're just converting to more over and over again. You can't touch each other. No touching. Splendor cannot be killed. Stop trying. Project L and other games. Do you think... It's like one of those maybe you had to be there things, right? For all these new board gamers who are like, well, Splendor's not that good. Maybe you just had to be there, okay?
I used to have this as more of a fight in my head. Like, there was a time where I felt burnt out on Splendor, and, you know, Century Spice Road was a new thing, and it had this conversion thing. And
you
so
magpied the crystals, didn't you?
I did magpie the crystals. I had a big collection of crystals in my nest. And then I didn't play them for a while. There were like 6 months, a year where I didn't play either of them. And then in my head, I sort of felt, well, maybe Century is better than I remember being. Or maybe it is superior to Splendor. And then recently, I've played both of them, both in person and on BGA, and you can find implementations of both on BGA. And it just like, there's no clear indication that Splendor is a superior game than playing them both a couple times on BGA. Like Splendor, you can play it nice and quick and easy and in a pacifist sort of manner. You can play it just, you know, working on your own thing. Or you can play it really cutthroat, really, really intense. And both experiences are great. Whereas Century Spice Road, I just don't feel like there's nearly enough interesting, especially not nearly as much interaction, where I think it really falls versus Splendor.
This strikes me as one of those cases where, you know, Splendor had been getting enough love at that point that there were people that were just so desperate to tear it down that when Century Spice Road burst into the scene, they were just like, oh man, this is it. This is the game that I'm going to choose as like my stake in the ground. And yeah, I don't know. I remember that fateful Gen Con where Kellen and I both picked up games, and I remember where we were sitting, like in, you know,
me too.
In
I don't
the
know
lobby
why
of the hotel, playing this game, and just both being like, I don't see it, but yeah, that's Splendor, I guess, takes it.
We're
there.
unanimous. This is too much unanimous.
Okay, let's move on to maybe a little bit more contentious: Race for the Galaxy versus Roll for the Galaxy.
Oh, no, Neelan. I feel bad for you for what you're about to try to defend.
Neelan, you're a roll guy?
I'm a roll guy. Roll's better. Roll's like if you like fun games, and Race is like if you like boring games.
Oh, that's...
I hadn't considered that. I hadn't considered the magpie thing, I hadn't considered the Switch thing, and I had not considered the boring thing. So you guys are
really
all
appropriate.
What could be better than taking a massive fistful of tiny little multicolored dice, putting them into your little plastic die cup, rattling them around, tipping them out behind your screen, and then finding little ways to assign them to like cool little jobs?
What could be better than to take a game that has stood the test of time, that is balanced to a knife's edge, that is like renowned for how mechanically and mathematically perfect it is, and just add a whole bunch of BS.
Renowned.
Let's add some dice. Let's add a bag of planets. Let's add all this garbage on top of it. Just bloat it out. No, I mean, I honestly have not really enjoyed my games of Roll, whereas Race I absolutely obviously love, as it is my number 2 game of all time. I don't know. I think if I revisited Roll, I'd enjoy it more, but there's just stuff that I don't like about it. There's a lot of extra that I don't like about it.
I've seen a few other games that use some of the mechanisms from Roll for the Galaxy. I may have been tainted. My first play of Roll for the Galaxy, the rules explanation was like 2/3 over, And I was like, well, I've played Race for the Galaxy. Like, like this shouldn't be a thing. And like, it is so unintuitive. Like, I get how Race can be unintuitive to learn the iconography, and I'm with you. But then in Roll, it doesn't all translate as one-to-one. It's like, wait, which dice do I need to do which thing? And it's like, again, it's like Nealon just wants to play with himself, right? If you want to play with others, Race. You want to play with yourself like Nealon, Roll.
I think like the thing that's hard is some of this is like
something is.
Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But but the thing that is hard to hear is specifically where Roll just worked for me on a level that Race didn't. And I think some of this is stuff that I've expressed before on the podcast where Race left such a bad first impression that Roll sort of came in and like filled in all the gaps on. Like Roll was the game where I was like, oh, I get it. And then I played a lot more of it, and then I went back to Race. I was like, well, no, this doesn't work the way it does in Roll. So it's like kind of the opposite problem, right? Whereas I think for most people, if you are familiar with the Race systems, and then you sort of try to like work your head around the way that Roll twists them, I can see why that would be frustrating. For whatever reason, I just like the way things worked in Roll more.
We're just going to let you stand there in your wrongness and be wrong.
Sure. So Roll wins that one. Next up is...
It's because of how hard you were, Nealon.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, Lost Ruins of Arnak versus Dune Imperium.
I feel very strongly about this one.
I feel very strongly, and the answer is they're both dumb.
How
about
like
that?
Dune Imperium.
What? No,
Don't
it was
like
so
that.
long. It was so long. Roll the tape. I said back in episode 1, I didn't like Dune Imperium.
Haha. I have liked my plays of Dune Imperium. I have not really liked my plays of Arnak. I feel like I must be doing something wrong, although I've played it now in person and online on BJ a couple times, so I think I've got the rules down all correct. And it just feels so clunky to me that I just don't understand how it's gotten so popular. I mean, people love it and good for them, but I just have not really enjoyed Arnak anytime I played it, really.
It's funny because I don't know that I would describe Arnak as clunky because, like, in some ways, like, I think the thing that frustrates me about Arnak is that it's clean, like, to a fault. Like, something about the design just kind of feels like everything is smooth, but then not interesting. You know,
Yeah.
like none of the cards are that interesting. None of the abilities are that interesting. None of the placements are that interesting. None of the rewards are that interesting. It's just a repeated amount of just a trickle of like that dopamine hit of like, oh, you're just going to get the thing you need that will allow you to do the thing you need, which
that's
will get
fair.
you a bonus action. And like that is satisfying in itself, but it never feels like it goes wild in any way.
Right.
It feels like a very well created game with all of the edges shaved off. Whereas Dune Imperium is just weird and wacky. Like, it embraces the things that are weird about, very typically of Paul Denon's like deck builders in general, where you get a card, and to be fair, a lot of the time you look at the card market and nothing in there is that enticing, but then you get a card that just kind of feels like, man, this is crazy, and this does this weird new thing that interacts with the systems in weird ways. And the way that the worker placement actually affects your deck building is very pronounced in Dune Imperium, as opposed to Lost Ruins of Arnak, where just they don't really seem like those mechanics interplay as much.
I will be voting for Dune Imperium, and I do like the amount of conflict that happens in it, but I don't think it all coalesces as well as everyone else seems to, because this is like super high ranked. This might be the highest ranked Dune game. I could be wrong about that, of which there are a lot. I don't find that the worker placement and the deck building are really linked in any way that's fun. I just find it to be mediocre worker placement and cool deck building. But then there are like a lot of weird special powers that are quite impactful that don't feel like they add up with the game itself. But again, if I have to choose, we don't even need to get into Lost Ruins of Arnak because I couldn't be less hard about that one.
Dune Imperium takes it. Okay, Cascadia and Wingspan.
Well, we need a family expert. We wish we had Ambi the Cobalt tank back and not Nealon.
We do.
So, I mean, right off the bat, the appeal of both of these as games are like that are theme forward, which is to say that like the theme, the art is like a huge part of the appeal here. You know, like bird watching, bird collecting, I guess more correctly, is like an
kidnapping.
Bird kidnapping is an unused theme in board games, and like the sort of the very natural world type, you know, cultivating terrain for animals in Cascadia. These are inviting themes that don't get used a lot in board games.
2 games enter, only one can leave. For me, it's actually Wingspan, believe it or not. I don't... Cascadia is good. I like the artwork. Wingspan, like, while I don't love it, I do enjoy the process of playing it, even though, I have some mechanical balance concerns, blah, blah, blah. Like if I had to play one tonight, I would prefer to play Wingspan over Cascadia, even though they may be in sort of these different weights where it's hard, because Wingspan is more of a commitment, I think, to get through than Cascadia.
And I think actually therein kind of lies like a lot of where I'm falling on this, and that, Wingspan is a heavier game. I would struggle to call a game that is like very accessible to non-gamers, whereas Cascadia is like simplicity itself. And I've had a lot of fun playing Cascadia multiple times. Like, I think that the way that the scoring conditions in Cascadia vary from game to game, that gives it like a freshness while kind of still building on the same core. And I always just like the way that it looks as you build out your little landscape in Cascadia. Just a lovely game.
So you would go Cascadia?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm torn on this. I think the big issue with comparing these two is the relative weight. Although they're both sort of medium, I think Cascadia is pretty clearly medium light or light, and Wingspan is flirting more with medium to heavier. And if you want to see a good example of this, I don't know if you guys have seen it. Mandy Patinkin, the actor, him being taught Wingspan was on Twitter, and it was really a viral meme there for a second. That was pretty funny. But yeah, I think I would go with Wingspan. I enjoy both those games. I think they're both deserving of their praise. I just think Wingspan, you do have a little more room for exciting plays and unbalanced play, because you can build engines a little bit crazier in Cascadia, where you're going to be relatively close to those who you're playing against. And that's part of the allure of Cascadia. You're not going to crush people, and people can always feel like they're in it. But I enjoy Wingspan's variety, I think, a little bit more.
Though I do think that the publisher Flatout Games of Cascadia, which just won the Spiel des Jahres, should put Neelan's quote on the front of the box, which, if I heard it right, was simplicity itself. So that deserves a spot. When you're updating the game box with the Spiel des Jahres winner logo, also include our logo and that line, simplicity itself.
You're welcome, Flatout Games.
You're very welcome.
Next up, Eclipse versus Twilight Imperium.
Hard for me to judge this battle because I have not played Eclipse.
Me too.
There you go.
I have not played Eclipse.
We're twins in that way. Yeah.
As the only person that's played both, then Eclipse wins.
Wow. Well, you just angered a whole lot of people who like that Space Lion quite a bit.
I did like my play of Twilight Imperium, I will say.
It's fine.
I think that the length of Eclipse also is factored in. It's the genre.
Sure.
The genre.
Codenames and Decrypto.
Okay. We don't need you to weigh in. I'll just do it. Right. Here's the thing. If you were at gunpoint, right? You're at gunpoint. You can only keep one game. Okay. And it has to be a party word game. Okay.
Very weird scenario, by the way.
For the rest of your life. Okay. This is the situation. The gun, the rest of your life. It has to be a party word game. I think that everyone would choose Codenames. And I think that that's because Decrypto is more complicated. I don't think that in reality it has more shelf life. I think everyone just played Codenames 100 times before Decrypto even came out onto the marketplace. More range of groups that you can play it with. It has to be Codenames, even though I might like Decrypto better as a human. Codenames is like simplicity itself.
Hey, I heard that before.
Wow, yeah, that's smart. No, I think you're exactly right. I prefer to play Decrypto. I think it's a more interesting game, but there's a reason that Codenames has been higher up on my lists for forever. Like, it's much more accessible. It's much easier to play. It's much easier to get in and out of. It's a little bit more dynamic in what it affords you to do in terms of clue giving. Yeah, I think Codenames is deservedly a modern classic in a way that Decrypto probably won't ever elevate to, as much as I love Decrypto.
Yeah, for me, this is clearly Codenames. You want to play a family word game or a word game of this weight. You want to be able to like get it off the shelf and get it played and start going, and just the crypto difficulty of teaching. While it's rewarded in the end by like a more gamier game that sometimes I feel more in the mood for, it's just the simplicity of getting Codenames taught and out to the table and played just makes it clearly the winner for me.
But when you mean clearly, right, you mean after that sort of perfect hypothetical situation,
right? No, yeah,
with the gun, the word party game.
Yeah.
See, it was clear to me,
crystallized in my brain until you put me in that mental scenario. Then,
yeah, I thought I knew what was going to win, and then I pictured myself at gunpoint with the guy saying, "Pick one family word game." I'm like, okay, now this is real. Now I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Do you want to re-record
Lastly, the hottest of the hots of takes, Ark Nova versus Terraforming Mars.
So I don't really like Terraforming
Mark?
Mars.
There's one clear winner here.
Okay.
No preamble needed.
You're not going to tell me Terraforming Mars, are you?
No.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm with you. I was getting there.
Okay, I was worried. It sounded like there was a little bit of a but.
No.
Oh, there's a butt coming.
Yeah.
No, see, if you wanted me to cut the long story short, you should have had me imagine a gunman saying pick one tableau builder with a lot of cards. No, yeah, it's Ark Nova for me. I liked my play of Ark Nova. I didn't love it. I didn't go crazy for it, but I think it's clearly my choice over Terraforming Mars.
It's days like these. I'm glad the Chinese invented gunpowder.
Perfect. Okay, I don't think there's a better way to end the episode.
I don't think we need to say anything else. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Board Game Barrage. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Board Game Barrage podcast. We want to hear your takes on all of these grudge matches, as well as pitch us some of your own.
I will insist, though, when you're giving us your take, please at least take the time to imagine yourself at gunpoint with somebody telling you to pick, your favorite trick-taking game.
It changes the whole thing, and you wouldn't believe until you've tried it. You can head over to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord if you want to pitch in on what you think your takes on each of these matches is. And like I said, present some of your own, and we'll all vote on what we think based on the matches that you line up. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with Discord, it's a great way just to hang out and chat with us. So please head on over to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. That's going to do it for the episode. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro music, What's in Your Mind, Kid, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
I'm hot. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself.
Yeah.
It's like Nealon.
Oh, Nealon.
Oh, no, we can't hear Nealon.
We've lost you, Nealon.
Dirty Ears Nealon.
Dirty Ears Nealon, indeed.
Well, you came back to America, but your IT stuff still sucks, just like the power in South Africa. No, we can hear you.
You're back.
I was just finishing the song.
His song, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt him.
It was, people love it when I sing, and that's what we've kind of learned.
That's the number one thing we've learned from all our user feedback.
235 episodes, and that's sort of near
Biggest
the top
takeaway.
of what we've... Yeah, top 5 takeaway,
yeah,
for sure.
For sure.
At least.
So, Kellen and I also played a game of Codex Naturalis. This is a game that I've seen a lot of popularity on Board Game Arena. It is designed by, what did I just say? Vincent
Dupont.
Thomas.
Thomas Dupont.
Is it Thomas?
Yeah, it's
Thomas.
By Thomas Dupont. Thank you, Kellen. This is a very simple...
When you find yourself thinking, okay, if I do that, what is the implementation? How am I I'm having a hard time implementate. Wait, implication. Sorry. What is implication? I'm going to keep it in for the outro. Don't worry about it. Implication.
This is what he never lets you hear.
That's right.
Listener.
But I'm leaving this in. So
The implementation.
implementation. One of the reasons